The scout car rolled through morning fog at 15 miles per hour. German crew scanning for American positions. Commander's hatch open, 20mm cannon ready. 50 yards ahead, crouched in a muddy ditch, Corporal James Dalton watched it approach. He had no bazooka, no mines, no anti-tank rifle, just a length of rusted barbed wire wrapped round a shovel handle. An improvised device that every officer in the 34th Infantry Division had explicitly forbidden him from using. He'd already been threatened with court-martial twice. In 90 seconds, that wire would flip a 2-ton armoured vehicle 3 times and overturn US Army doctrine. This is the story of how one soldier couldn't watch his friends die anymore and risked everything to stop it. What you're about to hear isn't in the official record. It's not in the field manuals or the after-action reports. The US Army eventually adopted the technique, but never credited the man who invented it. First, you'll discover why dozens of American soldiers were dying to German scout cars, and why approved doctrine couldn't save them. Then you'll hear how a railway switchman from Indiana spent one night alone in no man's land, stringing wire between 2 trees at exactly 14 inches off the ground. And finally, you'll understand why the army couldn't punish him and couldn't reward him either. By March 1944, 407 men in Dalton's division had been killed by reconnaissance vehicles. The approved methods required equipment nobody had, so one corporal decided that regulations didn't mean much when you've watched 11 mates die in 3 weeks. 6:47 a.m., 12th of March 1944. Cassino, Italy. The Liri Valley was thick with fog that morning, clinging to the mud like wet cotton. James Dalton had been in that ditch since before dawn, waiting. The German Sd.Kfz 222 appeared exactly as he'd predicted. Early patrol, same route, scanning for American positions before calling in artillery strikes. Light armoured scout car, fast, armed with a 20mm cannon and machine gun, could strike and disappear before the Americans could respond. The wire trembled in Dalton's hands. One chance. He'd placed it the night before, 2 entrenching tools buried deep in mud on either side of the narrow road, barbed wire strung between them at axle height, 14 inches off the ground. Too loose and it would snap, too tight and it would break. He'd adjusted it until it hummed. At 50 yards, the scout car's front axle caught the wire. The wheel locked instantly. Momentum did the rest, flipped the vehicle violently, rolled it 3 times before it landed upside down, engines screaming. Dalton ran forward, captured the surviving crew, and removed the wire before officers arrived. Officially, the scout car had simply flipped on the rough terrain. Unofficially, the solution spread through the division that same day. If you're the sort of person who wants to hear stories about the soldiers who actually won the war, not the generals in the history books, but the corporals in the ditches, then you're exactly who we make these videos for. Every week we dig into the forgotten moments where ordinary men solved impossible problems, usually by breaking the rules. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, let me tell you how Dalton learned to see what the army couldn't. Jimmy Dalton grew up in Gary, Indiana. His father worked 15-hour shifts in the blast furnaces at US Steel, feeding 6 children on a steel worker's wages. Jimmy spent his afternoons in the rail yards instead of classrooms. Not because he was skipping school, because that's where he learned how systems failed. How one broken connection could derail everything. How small fixes with wire and scrap metal could prevent disasters. By 17, he was a trained switchman. By 19, he was in North Africa wearing an American uniform. He'd been promised training and opportunity. What he got was 8 weeks of basic instruction, an unfamiliar rifle, and transport to a war zone. By the time he reached Italy in late 1943, he understood the reality perfectly. The approved methods assumed you had the right equipment, and nobody did. The 34th Infantry Division fought north through Italy village by village, ridge by ridge. But what killed more Americans than frontal assaults was German reconnaissance. Light armoured scout cars appeared at dawn and dusk. They'd map positions, spot weaknesses, then disappear before anyone could respond. 20 minutes later, artillery would rain down on exactly where the Americans were dug in. Doctrine said to stop them with bazookas, mines, or anti-tank rifles. The division barely had any. So men died. Eddie Kowalski was killed on the 18th of February when rifle rounds bounced off a scout car's armour and the machine gun answered. He was 22. Sergeant Mike Brennan died 5 days later trying to stop one with a grenade. Threw it from 30 yards. Missed. The scout car didn't. Corporal Luis Vargas died on the 4th of March, cut down whilst running for cover when a patrol appeared at dawn. By early March, 47 men had been lost to reconnaissance vehicles alone, not in combat, not in assaults, just murdered during morning patrols because the approved doctrine required equipment that was sitting in a depot somewhere in Naples. After another attack killed 2 more soldiers on 10th of March, Dalton made his decision. That night he took barbed wire, 2 entrenching tools, and went out alone into no man's land. He chose a narrow road between 2 trees, placed the shovels deep in the mud, strung the wire at 14 inches, exactly axle height for a German scout car. He adjusted it until it hummed, buried the shovels lightly so they'd hold but not be obvious, then returned to his foxhole. At dawn, the scout car came, and everything changed. After that first flip, the technique spread quietly through the division. At night, soldiers copied the setup. More scout cars flipped, more crews were captured. German patrols slowed, dismounted, grew cautious. Artillery strikes dropped, casualties stopped. Officers noticed the results immediately, but they couldn't officially approve the method without admitting that approved doctrine had failed, that 47 men had died because the manual was wrong and the equipment wasn't there. So they made a different choice. Battalion rejected the incident report. Division looked the other way. No one officially approved the wire traps, but no one ordered them stopped either. That was the compromise. On paper, everything followed the manual. On the ground, the wire stayed in place. Dalton was never court-martialed. He was given silence instead. Eventually, he was quietly reassigned to teach the technique to other units, never officially documented, never credited by name. And in that silence, the method spread across Italy. No orders, no medals, no credit. In war, sometimes the system doesn't change. It simply steps aside when something better works. After the war, James Dalton returned to Gary, Indiana, married, raised a family, worked in the rail yards for 4 decades, the same rail yards where he'd learned to see how systems failed. He never talked about Italy, never sought recognition. Years later, the US Army quietly adopted wire obstacles at axle height as approved doctrine. The field manual credited the innovation vaguely to field experience in Italy 1944. The method survived. The man faded into history. That's how innovation really happens in war. Not through manuals or committees, but through soldiers who can't watch their friends die anymore and are willing to risk punishment to stop it. That morning in the Italian mud, a corporal's wire said everything that needed to be said. Sometimes the best solution is the one nobody approved. And 47 families never had to bury another son. If you made it this far, thank you. Seriously, stories like this take weeks to research, and they only exist because people like you actually watch them all the way through. If you want more stories about the soldiers who broke the rules and saved lives doing it, then subscribe. And if you think this story deserves to reach more people, share this video. James Dalton gave everything and asked for nothing. The least we can do is remember him properly. I'll see you in the next one.